It's a blustery Monday morning outside on I believe it's actually President's Day now that I think about it. So if you're one to celebrate and do a shot for Washington and Lincoln and all them, then happy President's Day. Good for you. I'm Brian Cady. That is Jeff Mlinar over there for Empire State Takeover. This is part one of episode 45 of 84 Feet with Cady and Cap. And yeah, it is officially sectional seeding week. Seedings will come out on Friday for the sectional tournaments with any potential preliminary games happening on a Saturday, and then we'll be in full swing into sectional action uh, Monday, Tuesday, no, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever, early next week. So either way, we are less than a week away from sectional action, the most wonderful time of the year for us, Jeff. And yeah, I know we've been talking about sectionals for it seems like really ever since the calendar turned over to January, and now it is the day is nigh as as we take a look at things from 4 days out now.
Yeah, I'm always guilty when it comes to kind of looking ahead to playoffs, and we've the format of this weekly discussion with the podcast has been very class based. That's how we tend to organize things. We don't talk about, hey, let's talk about the suburban, and then let's talk about the foothills and the Wazoo. We're D, C, B, A, um, and that's always the way that I think of things too. Of just thinking of it more by classification and whatnot. So that kind of leads into being someone's always thinking about playoffs and how things might shake out and matchups and so on and so forth. So maybe I'm guilty of somebody that looks ahead. That's why I try to go into areas later in the season that actually care about their league with league playoffs, just because it gives that playoff this means something sort of feel. But yeah, over the last month or so, like the last month of the season, of the regular season, is the good teams are looking ahead to playoffs, and the bad teams are looking ahead to track, softball, Snapchat being done.
TikTok.
So we've made it to that point that everybody was looking ahead to, one way or the other.
Well, let's just jump right into the stuff you were at this past week. Um, Focus will begin on Stillwater because they had a 3 game week. Came away 3-0 with home and home action against Tamarack, winning both those games Monday at Tamarack and then Thursday at home, uh, in which they were propelled by a big third quarter performance in that home game on Thursday. And then in the middle of that Tamarack sandwich was a win over Spa Catholic on Wednesday. So you got to see the Stillwater team firsthand for the game that was at Tamarack on Monday. Uh, what what kind of takeaways did you? Oh, let me put it this way: did you take away anything about this Stillwater team that you didn't already have as an opinion going into it?
No, there was nothing new. Um, Depth of weapons shined, I thought, in that, I guess, throughout the season, but in that game, because some days it'll be an Addison Thornton day, some days it'll be a Miranda Price day, sometimes Maddie Chat will get hot. Uh, Sometimes it's just a combination of everybody with the team wide or lineup wide athleticism they bring. It was a little bit more of like this was a little bit more of a Miranda day. So it was nothing that was out of the ordinary, but it was just a matter of depth of weapons shining again. Uh, not relying on just one kid to be their engine all the time. So yeah, it was. I don't say this in a negative way, but out of any game that I've been to this year, that was one of the least remarkable games that I've watched this entire season. There wasn't anything chaotic. There wasn't any, topsy turvy. One team has a big run, the other team responds with a big run. There wasn't like a stellar individual performance. It was just Stillwater started strong and gradually separated over the course of the night. It was very like cut and dry 32-minute basketball game. So that was my takeaway from that. It's kind of difficult to have takeaways from those sorts of games, I guess. But the other thing about Stillwater, and if we want to say that they got this on Thursday, I don't know. I guess sure, but even I don't consider it quite that way. My prevailing thought from last Monday, from when they played at Tamarack, was just doing the 8 seconds of research that it needed to do this. When I was in the parking lot before walking into the gym, I was thinking about, I feel like Stillwater hasn't had any close games, and they haven't. They really haven't. Going into, at that point, they had played 16, I think, and they got 3 in last week. They had lost 2, both to Greenwich, both by the same exact score, 54-34, so they're both 20-point games. And then out of their wins, the closest win was by 18. And it was the first time around when they played Spa Catholic, and it was a 20-something point game after 3. They haven't had to play a crunch time possession all year, which is remarkable. It's interesting. I hope it doesn't hurt them in 2 or 3 weeks, because it's that's experience that you just can't simulate, where you have to execute, get a good scoring opportunity, and convert in a possession where you feel like you really need it. They have not had to feel that in the fourth quarter of a basketball game all season. Not once, not one time down the court. Which is, yeah, it's odd. And again, I hope it doesn't come back to bite them. But that was, going in, I'm like, okay, now we're at Tamarack. Tamarack's tough place to play. Caleb O'Doyne, so you have a lead guard that can keep teams in games. So I wonder if we can get this feeling here, and we didn't.
Same question, different team. Did you take anything new away about Tamarack, or we still carrying the same basic feeling of it being, just a matter of somebody stepping up to not match Kayla's contributions, but at least provide a little bit of how should I put this? Put a little less pressure on Kayla's shoulders, so to speak.
Complementary production.
Thank you.
Yeah, getting complementary production is the difference between them. They're not going to be like a 70-point team. It's just not their makeup. And they don't play enough possessions in a 32-minute game to be like a high-scoring team. A lot of what they do is in the half court. But getting complementary production is the difference between them scoring in the 50s and being able to have a night and beat any of these other Class B schools they're going to bump into in coming weeks. and scoring 35 and bowing out in quarterfinals. So that I think that's been a relatively constant theme for them, which the Stillwater game last Monday, they didn't really get it. I think they had opportunities. I thought that they came in pretty well game planned offensively, and Ron, Coach Bedoyan, sorry, I'm not trying to take your secrets away or anything. But Stillwater matches up the whole time. They aggressively, high hedge ball screens, and Tamarack came in relatively well game planned as far as, all right, when we're running this wing ball screen action, just slip it. Just slip. And they were aggressively slipping, and they got look after look after look after look because they were decisive with it. The slips were aggressive, they were violent, the ball got where it needed to get to, and Stillwater rotationally was often a step late. Turned into a few rim scoring opportunities, turned into a lot of fouls. Like a lot of Stillwater got in a little bit of foul trouble in the first half, especially because it was step late. Just step late, backside rotation, bump, hit. So they generated scoring opportunities off of that because they were pretty well scouted and pretty well prepared. And I thought, as far as that part of a game plan, they did a decent job executing it. Just have to convert a little more often. So, yeah.
Only other question I have coming out of that game, Stillwater, they're going to round out their 20-game regular season coming up on Thursday. They'll be one of the final 3 or 4 games being played by Section 2 teams the day before sectional seedings come out. They're playing a rescheduled crossover game. Actually, this might be a league game, actually. No, it can't be a league game. Sorry. Wow, I cross-referenced my conferences too much there. Against Cooksaki Athens. Obviously a game that doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things for Stillwater seeding for the Seas because we pretty much had Greenwich locked as 1 and Stillwater as 2 for a while now. But from a B perspective, I know that, we might not necessarily think this would happen, but depending on what, it's 32 minutes is 32 minutes. They still got to go out and play the game. Let's say Cooksaki gets the upset. Could that have, despite losing the head-to-head matchup against Catskill, could a win like that on the final day of the season impact who gets the 1 in Bs at all? Or are we assuming at this point it's already lock, stock, and barrel for Catskill?
Well, it can't because Catskill will be the higher league placement.
Very true.
So in the order of seeding an order of where you place within your league, they just can't because Catskill got that. But I think what it does more so is when you go to the seeding meeting the next morning, if Cooksaki is able to, let's say, if Cooksaki is able to pull that one off, right?
Mm-hmm.
That gives Chris Quinn going into that meeting the next morning a lot of a big time recent example fact to throw into the picture when you're talking about comparing the leagues for seeding, where you're talking about where the Patroons should be seated compared to
the Watsons.
And
especially given Mechanicville right now is in the overall scheme of things with Class B, Mechanicville is slotted in as third overall based on overall record, and they're coming off losing the Wazrin title game to Greenwich on Saturday, which we'll get to in a second because I know you were there. So what? Even do you think even if it's a close loss, there's still consideration there for CA to take the 2, or does it have to be a win?
No, I think that there could be. I'm not the mover and shaker and decision maker, but I think that there could be consideration. Like if you're able to do something that the other Wazerans weren't able to do, and legitimately push Stillwater for 32 minutes and make it a close game, and again make it the sort of game where they have to execute and create positive results in the last 4 minutes of a game in order to win, then you did something that your counterparts weren't able to do. So I think I think that there's a lot of bees that have rooted interest in this game. If your patroons are, or by patroons I mean Chris Catskill, you're rooting for Koksaki in this one, even though it probably doesn't affect Catskill's standing in the seedings. Even if Koksaki loses his game by 50, Catskills probably put themselves in a position to be the one. But you're still, if you're Catskill, you're still rooting for Koksaki. If you're Mechanicville Tamarack, you are really rooting for Stillwater. Because Stillwater blows them out. That looks a little bit better for them upon seedings with the Mechanicals and the Tamaracks versus the Koksakis and so on. If Koksaki makes it close or they're able to pull one out on the road, then that's not going to be a favorable not a favorable look for the Wazerans.
And because of the direction the conversation just took, I'm going to skip the 2 games you were at on Tuesday and Friday and go right to the game we just referenced a moment ago from Saturday. The Wasser and a lot of misdirection going on here. Greenwich.
When you think he's gonna zig, he zags.
Mechanicville, they actually ended up hosting both Wasserin title games on the girls and boys side. Greenwich getting the resounding win over the Mechanicville girls to take down the Wasserin League title, finish their regular season a perfect 20-0 overall. Again, I mean, I'm not expecting really any different answer than not expecting any different answer for Greenwich than you gave me for Stillwater, so I'll just go right to Mechanicville on in this matchup. Was there anything that you took away being able to see Tanner Eisman now with more time on the floor since returning from injury? Was there anything you took away from the way the squad was from that game?
No. Because I think the more that, and I've said this, I've had discussions with people from coaches to officials. We've made it almost to the very end of the regular season, and I felt like I still hadn't figured Mechanicville out. And I think that's been kind of a common theme. If anything, maybe I think I figured them out a little bit more on Saturday. And it's tough to, they have a lot of pieces, and they have a lot of pieces that can work on a puzzle. And they have legitimate, functional, effective athletes. I think Greenwich, it took Greenwich probably 10 minutes to get used to that again. after playing a few weeks of blowouts, and then getting back. And Mechanicville's had maybe a little bit more, just the way that the league schedule worked out. Maybe had a little bit more in the way of challenges over the last couple weeks than Greenwich did. So it took Greenwich a few minutes to get used to. Oh wait, we're playing against like real athletes now that are aggressive and that are competitive and that are jamming rebounders, so we can't just like throw the ball over our shoulder for an outlet pass and then be lazy. So Mechanicville matches up. They match up okay athletically. They just don't have enough in the way of ball handling. And being able, and everything that comes with ball handling. Notice I didn't say dribbling. Ball handling to me, like, is not just the art of like bouncing a basketball and having it come back up to where you want it to. It's getting to spots with the basketball in your hands against pressure. It's getting to spots on the floor that the offense that you are running is designed for you to be able to get to. It's putting yourself, getting the ball where it needs to be through the pass, on time, on target is passing, but being able to get it to that point where you're able to effectively make that pass, ball handling. They just don't have enough of it. They have Molly D. Sienna, and then once you get past Molly, they're leaning on Tanner Eisenman, who's in effect, she's not a 5, but she's in effect their 5, and she is a forward. Like, no questions about that. She is a forward, but they kind of lean on her for secondary ball handling, and it can work against some teams. The teams that I have chosen to watch them against, it hasn't worked. It hasn't. They've had problems with Greenwich and their 5 athletes and their aggressive pressure. Stillwater and their 5 athletes and their maybe not so much aggressive pressure, but superior length and activity. It kind of creates inability to create passing angles, inability to get consistent paint touches. That's where they struggle to generate half-court offense, and it's kind of like the trickle down. That's their biggest flaw right now. They struggle to generate half-court offense. Why do they struggle to generate half-court offense? Because they struggle to generate quality shot opportunity, quality scoring opportunities, quality shot attempts. Well, why is that? Just not enough in the way of effective ball handling to be able to get the ball where it needs to be able to handle pressure, to be able to do the sort of things to get in a reasonable half-court flow and rhythm. And Greenwich is a tough team to play against when that is when that's a flaw. They hung with them for a quarter. Like I had mentioned, I think it took Greenwich a quarter to get used to playing against actual athletes again. And Mechanicville started strong. They competed. It was a tie game at the end of the first, and that's just because Greenwich had a stop score sequence to end the first. Mechanicville did take a 4-point lead, but after that, it wasn't like Mechanicville stopped competing in the final minutes. They stopped competing with probably 4 minutes left, and that turned it from a 25-point game to a 40-point game. but they competed pretty well for 3+ quarters. But it was just kind of an apples and oranges sort of matchup. And Greenwich second quarter, I believe they went plus 18, blew it open. Mechanicville played better again to start the second half, but they bumped into something that, and here I'm going to go on my soapbox. I went on my soapbox on Twitter about this during the game, and I'm about to do it here. They bumped into a problem that I think a lot of teams have bumped into this year. If you keep, like, if Bailey Wolf isn't fully on your scouting report, Jason Slater is just going to probably look over at you and smile and shake your hand and say thank you. And Brooke Kuzmic is a tremendous basketball player, and there's a reason that she is the head of discussion, and there's a reason that she's, Channel 13 All-Star, and there's a reason that she's Wazzer, and more than likely we're going to be talking like Wazzer and MVP again. But Bailey's legit, and what I've seen more, like, I made this comment to somebody early in the third quarter. Bailey Wolf has had more open looks and seen more advantageous matchups this year than I think she has in her entire basketball life. And in the third quarter, even though Mechanicville played well, she got an advantageous matchup. And it was Tanner was guarding her. And Tanner's a nice player. Tanner's a good defender. Tanner is a forward that's coming off of a knee injury. Guarding somebody that's a high-level athlete that has explosiveness off the bounce when she's able to get to her right hand.
It's not going to work.
But shoots it well enough that you have to stay up on her. It's a bad matchup. So, and Bailey had a solid first half. Brooke was, a little bit more of the eye catcher, especially late in the first half. But once Bailey got that, it's just an advantage. Like, basketball's a game of matchups, team matchups and individual matchups. That's an advantageous matchup. If you're a guard with that level of athleticism and shooting ability, and you have a forward guarding you, you're licking your chops. You're like, ball, come over here. And if you're not thinking that, like, if you're not like, yo, bring it this side, I'm mad at you for not recognizing the matchup. But she recognized it. They recognized that. They worked through her in the third quarter. She had a really strong second half. And they just continue to blow away.
Before I touch on one or two other things about Class B, the reason, one of the reasons I should say that I honed in on, those matchups potentially impacting Class B is because with the amount of schools that have withdrawn themselves from being in the Class B sectionals, we've gone from 17 qualified programs down to 14. So now you're looking at the 1 and 2 seeds getting byes in the round of 16 and automatically going right into the quarterfinals. So that's why there's added emphasis in, that Coxsackie Stillwater matchup Thursday, because that legitimately could be a difference between having both patroons getting a bye in that first round, or Catskill Mechanicville being the two byes. So that's the reasoning behind that discussion.
Yeah.
A couple of things about the Bees. First off, Corinth, they're able to get a pair of victories last week, including Lake George in the finals to win the Adirondack League Championship. Grand scheme of things, does this really provide any kind of little extra push to get Corinth up into the conversation of or into a top four seed, or do you think things are? Do you think that things have been done too well by teams behind them right now in the overall record standings, where it didn't really matter what they did?
Yeah, not a top four, um, because they've got something on their record that you were at Big Red Day.
Oh, right. Yes, correct.
So with that, and you factor in Adirondack League schedule, I mean, we're definitely not talking a top four. Um,
I could see a point where people would be willing to put them as low as 7, honestly,
yes, I could see that.
because you have Cooksaki Catskill, Mechanicville Tamarack, but then you also have the two Colonial Council teams in Voorheesville and LaSalle, specifically LaSalle, by the way, who was coming off a big win last week over at Holy Names on Tuesday, where
Hmm.
Kate Galooly dropped 45 on their heads.
Yeah,
So, I mean, that's a big resume builder for LaSalle, where you could say, hey, I mean, not only do they play a superior strength of conference schedule, but they've got this really nice win against a potential contender in the A's. So, yeah, I mean, I totally understand where this could, as much as you want to reward winning a league title, when you break it down for face value, Corinth might they're kind of at a place where I feel like they're 7 at best.
yeah. My gut says they end up at 7, and I think it's 7 at best. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think the discussion is more between them and Greenville and Cobleskill.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Um, Class C, because we kind of dipped into them a little bit with the Greenwich conversation, um,
and Stillwater.
as well as Stillwater. So obviously, Greenwich, Stillwater, top two. We know that. Um, they also have a few teams that have bowed out of playing in sectionals. So we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 16. So nice and perfect number there. 16 teams. As of right now, there's always a chance for a last second withdrawal, but right now we're looking at a full 16 team bracket for Class C when it comes out on Friday. And obviously, a couple of games that could potentially impact seeding. They'll be coming up tomorrow night, Tuesday the 18th at Fulton Montgomery, as they'll have the WAC girls consolation and girls championship games. The championship game being Burn Knox Westerlo against Northville Part 2, as you were at the first the first matchup between those two teams at Northville, where Northville won. I believe it was a 57-50 game, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And then the consolation game, which we played right before that, will be Cobleskill against OESJ. And there, you legitimately could be looking at the difference between those two games. You could be looking at the difference between a 3 or a 4, or maybe even lower, depending on how they weigh the WAC schedules compared to certain Adirondack teams that are right near them. That's basically what we're looking at. Looking at basically whoever comes away looking more impressive, falling into the Stillwater side of the bracket, the least impressive looking falling into the Greenwich side of the bracket. As looks like Jeff might be having some internet issues here for a second. So, yep, there he goes. Yeah. So I mean that's literally what it's breaking down as, and those two matchups are going to be the consolation game is certainly going to be interesting in respect that these two teams have played. They did not play a home and home this year, but I do believe they played. They did play once this year. I know for a fact. Just trying to find it. Yeah, right at the end of the year. Um, they played the last regular season game, quote unquote, with OESJ getting the win by 10 at home against Cobleskill. So be interesting to see what happens in the rematch on a neutral site, a little bigger floor, obviously, since they'll be on a college floor. Meanwhile, the title game I mentioned, BKW Northville. Um, yeah, I mean they're in a position where, um, Northville's pretty much locked in as the one, I think, regardless of what happens in this WAC Cup game for them. Um, but if BKW can get the win against Northville, that's not going to leapfrog Greenwich or Stillwater. But I mean, I feel like even if BKW lost, this is where I'm going to go on a little bit of a limb here. I feel like even if BKW lost close, um, I feel like they could. And just getting an update from Jeff real quick. Sorry. Um, so, sorry about that. So yeah, that's that. I feel like BKW, even if they lose a close game, I think they can lock up the 3, regardless of what OESJ does against Cobleskill in the consolation game. But if Northville handles business in an emphatic fashion, uh, I don't feel like it's going to matter what Cobleskill. Excuse me, yeah, what Cobleskill did. Not Cobleskill. I'm sorry. What OESJ did in the consolation game. I feel like a winner or close loss gets BKW the 3. Any kind of blow up by Northville, BKW gets the 4. That's where I am in that regard. I was checking to see. He said his computer went ballistic, so I'm not sure exactly what that means, but hopefully we'll get him back on board in a second here with the show. So yeah, that pretty much taps into C and D right there. Because BKW beat OESJ to get to the WAC Cup final, whereas Northville, it wasn't easy necessarily, but they were able to get by Cobleskill back on Tuesday. From what I heard, I guess Haley Monroe had to hit a shot with less than 10 seconds left in order to get the W for Northville over Cobleskill. In fact, I have the exact message from my friend at Northville. Haley hit a 3 with 4 seconds to go to give them the 2-point win over Cobleskill. So that's how things were for Northville, and yeah, so Northville, they're in the title game for the WAC. Class D, like we've mentioned, cut and dry. And do we have Jeff back? Do we have him back? We just need his camera. Hey, bud.
I got
Welcome
to
back.
hear you say, I got to hear you say, and the 88 times.
Oh, okay. All right. So yeah,
sound like
yeah.
someone who's trying to turn the engine over.
So basically, this was what I just said, and you'll probably agree with me on this. So obviously, the WAC Cup is really the only thing that could have a potential impact between Class C at this with Class C at this point. My viewpoint is this: if BKW at the very least repeats the kind of game they had with Northville the first time, and it's a close loss, or even a win, BKW is locked in at 3 regardless of what OESJ does in the game prior that day. But if BKW gets run out of the gym and OESJ wins against Cobleskill, I think that leapfrogs OESJ into the 3 potentially and shoves BKW down to the 4 on the Greenwich side of the bracket.
I'm more of the thought of BKW as the 3. Like I think the 3 are locked because BKW's got 2 wins over OESJ.
Okay.
So, I for me the discussion starts to get a little bit more interesting once we're talking about the 4. once we get to the 4 and go from that down, I think I know that all the other stuff, but again, going to where the league placement is, like I don't think OESJ can leapfrog Burn.
Okay.
Because Burn finished high, just as far as where your league placement. I think Burn has to be above OESJ, and then Burn's got 2 wins over OESJ. So I'm thinking we're talking Greenwich, Stillwater, Burn, and then we get into OESJ versus Whitehall versus Maple Hill.
It's amazing how it seemed like you read my mind, because that's exactly the school I wanted to bring up quick. They finished 12-8. They play in a superior conference to that of Whitehall, and I'd say slightly above that of OESJ. Where I feel like that's the big wild card in the entire Class C picture at this point is where to put Maple Hill.
Yeah, I mean
because Maple Hill, you're looking at they've been, relatively speaking, they've been disappointing since mid-January, but that does include a pair of losses to Voorheesville, who have, like we mentioned, they've been a program on the rise really ever since Christmas. They hold losses, neutral site losses to Peru and Delaware Academy. A close loss at home. Well, excuse me, 2 close losses to Coxsackie Athens, who's going to be the 1 or 2 in the Bs. And then they close out the season strong with 3 wins in a row to put themselves in a position of being 12-8. It's that's gonna be a tough. That's gonna be tough to hard sell into being lower than 4 or 5, because, yeah, I mean, Whitehall, they have a 14-win season going into their season finale tonight in a non-league game at Ticonderoga, or it's not even, can't even be a league game. Ticonderoga's on Section 2. And I know Whitehall had, what was it, a 12, 13 game win streak at one point this season. But I mean, I don't know. Like, yes, you had a nice win at Lake George, a nice win against Hartford. You struggled to beat Hoosick Falls by 1. I don't know. I'm. It's a hard sell for me. And then you struggle to win at Hoosick Falls by 4. And when you did lose to Corinth, you lost by only scoring 18 points. So, like, for me, it's a hard sell to put Whitehall above Maple Hill at this point. So that at least puts Maple Hill at the 5. And then now we're splitting hairs between them and OESJ at this point, which, let me pull up their schedule quick and look here. OESJ, they closed the season winning 6 in a row before losing the WAC semis to BKW. Then they hold the regular season loss against BKW at home, the loss at Northville by 4, and a loss neutral site against
lost to Richfield.
Owen Young Richfield, yeah. So really, I think it comes down to comparing OESJ and Maple Hill at that point.
There's zero question that Maple Hill is a top 4 team in talent. Absolutely zero question. Player for player, line them up. Maple Hill is a top 4 talent team. The results, like, this shouldn't be a discussion. The results have put it into the results have made it so that it is a discussion.
Right.
Like they've had several opportunities to be able to get that signature win. They never did. They never got that. They never got that Kisaki. They never got that Catskill. They didn't get the Peru. They didn't get the Delhi. I only there's only one out of their 8 losses. There's only one that I look at and just think bad loss, and that was the Watervliet game. The other ones I'm not like, okay, you lost to Voorheesville twice. You lost to Peru. You lost to Delhi, who was really surging. You Kisaki twice, Catskill. Okay, cool, fine. I want to see, and they're all pretty close games. I'm concerned in their ability to finish out competitive games against quality opponents because they've had several opportunities and they have not. Like, I would have liked to see them at least get a couple of those, and they were unable to seal the deal on any of them, which is a concern. But talent-wise, line them up, like that's very clearly a top 4 team. So the question is a body of work and an ability to close out wins, because it's not like OESJ's no slouch, or are we going with the eye test of this team should be a threat? Now, if we're just splitting hairs over 4 versus 5 and they don't consider anybody else in that mix, it doesn't matter. All it dictates is who wears their home jerseys and who wears their away jerseys at Greenwich in a week and a half when they play their quarters up there. But yeah, I mean that's probably where the discussion is, and talent-wise, there's no question Maple Hill's not a top 4 team, but just have to close games out.
Yeah.
3-point loss. The Voorheesville, the one that I was at, the Voorheesville was like 18, so that was a blowout. But a couple 3-point losses, a 5-point loss, a 3-point loss. So they've had. Have they had any single-digit wins? I'm looking at this right now. No, not one. They beat Watervliet by 7 at the beginning of the season. They're 1-1, 1-2, 3, 4, 5. They're 1-5 in single-digit games this year.
Jeez. And 2 of those were against Kisaki.
Yep.
All right. I know we got to get to the other 2 games that you were at last week, but I just want to touch on. I want to finish up the lower classifications quick. So Class D, obviously, Northville, they're locked at the 1. There's no question about that. Win or lose the WAC title game, which brings us to the conversation we've been having, which is the 2 or 3. With Fort Ann bowing out, it's going to be a 6-team bracket. So it's literally just difference between if you get a bye into the semis or if you have to play a quarterfinal game. And Spa Catholic, they put out a 2-1 record there last week. They wound up getting blown out Stillwater, but they did get a pair of wins against Hoosick Falls, home and home, including a crazy 46-point game by Sophia Ryan in one of those Hoosick Valley games, which is a new school record for most points in a game by Sophia. So Do you feel like Spot Catholic has done enough to warrant the 2 at this point, despite, I mean, obviously numbers say one thing. The actual names next to those numbers mean something completely different potentially. So, do you feel like the committee's gonna look enough past the numbers to give them the 2, or do you think it's pretty much Hartford's at this point?
Yeah, I don't think the committee looks past the fact that Hartford beat them in December. So that's, they play each other once. I know it was on December 4th, but they played each other once. Hartford gets a 62-50 win. It was at Hartford, but still, um, they get the 62-50 win. They were up by double digits at half. They kind of carried a double digit lead pretty much all the way. Things can change, and they do change over the course of 2.5 months. But if all else is the same, Hartford got that win in early December, and I think that carries them to the 2, because it's not like Spa Catholic has had some major season turnaround where they've had some sort of win that really ruffles feathers and makes you think twice about what about the trajectory of their team. It's not like they beat Mechanicville or Tamarack or, God forbid, one of Stillwater or Greenwich. It's not like they got one of those wins. Hartford's lost games, but it's not like any of them are particularly perplexing. They've lost to Warrensburg. They lost to Corinth. They lost to Northville. Whatever. Meh. I think we're pretty much safe on Northville 1, Hartford 2, Spa Catholic 3.
So we can pretty much just lay out the whole Class D at this point. I mean, in my projections. So Northville, Hartford 1 and 2, they're the buys. Spa Catholic hosting Germantown, and I'll even give you the exact 4-5 layout. Salem took 2 out of 3 from Argyle, so Salem 4, Argyle 5.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I don't know how the league, whatever, like how it works out with the Adirondack League, because I'm looking at their stuff right now as far as what it shows for league record on the high school sports stats, and it says one's a 3-7 league record and one's a 3-8 league record, and neither of them have a game left. So I feel like I would have to really kind of scour back, and I don't think one of you has 10 league games and one has 11.
Right.
So I would have to scour back and try to figure out what the difference is between them. So, because that could be something that, league record is going to dictate that. But if the league record is even, then you're going to head-to-heads, which Salem and Argyle have actually played each other 3 times, with Salem taking 2 of them. One of them was a non-league game. It was a holiday tournament at Salem, but they split their league games, and Salem took 2 of 3 overall.
I think it's just wild how we could have a round 4, or we're gonna have a round 4 between 2 teams in Section 2. That's just I've never heard of such a thing, but hey, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's usually that's reserved for Frontier League stuff, like up in Section 3 in Watertown, because you'll play each other twice. They've consolidated their divisions a little bit, so there's a little bit, like, it's still common, but it's not, there's more opportunities around it. But that was always, you play everybody in your division twice, then they have their league playoffs. So you'll top two end up playing each other in the Frontier League Championship for round 3. But the way that the Frontier League divisions are set up is they're separated largely by class. Your Frontier D division is all D schools. Your Frontier C division is all C schools up the line. So then you could bump into each other a fourth time in sectionals. Shenango, Forks, and Waverly might have that in Class B in Section 4 this year. Played each other twice in stacked divisional play, had to play each other in a division tiebreak over the weekend, and they're 2 of the top 3 in Class B. So they could feasibly bump into each other in a
Sectional
semifinal or a final in round 4. But yeah, Section 2, it's not something that you come across often at all.
All right. We're gonna skip classes A and double A for a moment here, because, well, not entirely. The 2 games you had sandwiched in between, Greenwich Stillwater and Greenwich Mechanicville and Stillwater Tamarack. You had 2 suburban council teams sandwiched between 2 Western League games. We'll jump into the Tuesday game first, a battle of for the Suburban Council Championship, as it ended up being. Shaker at Columbia with in the most polite way possible. This is by no means towards the teams; it's towards the way the game was officiated. Shaker ended up winning a foul fest at Columbia. Shaker ended up winning, I believe it was 63-55 was the final score there. And Shaker wound up winning the Suburban Council regular season title because of that. Your takeaways from that game, from everything I heard, Malia Jackson was a very very big contributor to that victory for Shaker. All in all, though, what did you take away from that matchup for both teams?
It was kind of a war of attrition. And with that, I'm not 100% sure if there really is, like how deep the takeaways can really be. Shaker outlasted, right? Like it was outside of the fact, and the foul thing was what it was. I got the feel that it was suburban. It was your de facto Suburban Council Championship, so there was a little bit more riding on it. It was Columbia's senior night. The feel, and whether they realized it or not, the feel in the early goings of that game was a bit more testy when it comes to like wanting every call, like wanting every illegal screen, wanting every 3-second, wanting everything. And like there's working officials, and then there's it was a little bit more testy in the sense of like everyone wanted everything. I think the official said, okay, you get everything. Here, you want everything, you get everything. And then by the end of the game, everybody realizes, oh, I'll edit myself. Everything is a lot in a high school basketball game. If you want to call something, what earth to everybody listening to this, if you want to call everything in a high school basketball game, there is something to call every single possession. It's not the crispest basketball in the world. It's entertaining. It's athletic. It's competitive. Skill involved. It's not the world's most refined product. there's travels, there's illegal screens, there's two hands on a ball handler, there's double touch. There's if you want literal interpretation, there's something to call every single possession. Um, and you saw literal interpretation in the second half of that game. There was a whistle every possession. But if you want everything, that's what my feel was like. All right, you want everything, you get everything, and we don't really want everything. But take that for what it is. It was that sort of environment where it was just going to naturally be kind of testy. But they were, Shaker isn't the team that I necessarily would have expected going into the season. Like I wouldn't have expected them to be the sort of team to successfully navigate foul trouble and successfully navigate games with a little bit more of like a literal interpretation whistle, because they are more physical, punishing sort of group. So the fact that they were able to do both, they made it through the foul trouble, which they dealt with foul trouble and did enough on their own end, converting at the free throw line and staying, still got in foul trouble, but stayed kind of hands off enough when they needed to. Just it was another matter of like finding ways. And we talk about teams that have the talent but haven't been able to find ways, and we can talk about Shaker's talent. I brought up like the Beamers, Benzes, and Bentleys navigate, or the whatever, all that earlier in the year. Like that is an example. But you can have that and just still have them be shiny cars that don't win the race for you. And Shaker's just continuing to find ways. They've grinded out games, lower scoring, 40s, 50s. They've ran to wins. They've broken teams down. They've executed and made plays and made shots and crunch shots. They've kind of checked all of those boxes. I'm impressed with how they've been able to put that together.
Yeah, last week alone was a perfect dichotomy for Shaker because they went through the kind of game they went through with Columbia Tuesday, and then I think they dropped 90 on somebody's head on Friday night. So, like, if you want an explanation, the dichotomy of how Shaker can win in multiple ways, just look at last week alone. That can tell you right there.
Mm-hmm.
Other game you were at in the Suburban Council Friday evening was actually the one I was at as well. Senior night for Colony. They hosted Averill Park, which seems to be an annual tradition the last 3 years. 2 years ago was Colony AP at Colony for their senior night. Last year was at Averill Park for their senior night for Tot and Taylor Holohan. And then this year back at Colony for senior night for Caden Cornell and Sydney Pleat. A game that was and I again mean this in the nicest way possible, because you and I had texted about this at halftime about what to call it, and I'm going to go with the way I labeled it in our conversation. It was a game of I put it as sloppy aggression. And when I say sloppy aggression, I don't mean necessarily
John Cena throwing haymakers.
Like it wasn't like like it wasn't a Suburban Council game that devolved itself into like fourth grade CDYBL, but it was just the amount of defensive pressure being put on both teams by the other squad across from them was causing a lot of a lot of poor shots late in the shot clock, um, a lot of forced passes happening. And in the end, County was able to survive and get away with that W on senior night. Um, a game, by the way, which uh, Kaylee Ahern finally suited up. Did not play, but did suit up. Went through pregame warmups, just as a way to test out the foot injury she's been dealing with. Nothing for certain as to what her availability could be, whether it's against Shen in their crossover game tomorrow night or in sectionals going forward. But obviously, that's a good step forward for AP. We'll come back to that in a second, though. Let's just go through the general game itself first, Jeff. We both agree on the sloppy aggression part. Another one of those games like Shaker Columbia where, there's no real impression to take away from it because of the way the game was played.
Well, we talked about, I used the term literal interpretation with how the officiating became on Tuesday. Friday was the opposite. Friday had like a Rock'em Sock'em Robots kind of feel to it. And when you have the physical games where more is allowed, you have to play through more contact, you have to play through more hands and grabs and bumps and whatnot. It's more difficult to score, and score is going to be lower. Offense is going to look a little like you might have more flow to the game as far as fewer whistles, but offense is going to be more of a slog because there's less freedom of movement. So it was one of those games where freedom both ways. It wasn't like one team was getting it and the other team wasn't, but it was just freedom of movement wasn't like a point of emphasis in that game. So all that was more difficult. Now there was a little bit of foul trouble, a little bit. There, you could call 15 fouls in that game, but there were 60 to be called. Technically, so there was a little bit of foul trouble. Could have been a lot more. I'm kind of thankful it wasn't a lot more, but it was, and I'm thankful for it in the sense of like it was senior night, and then Averill Park is at less than full strength. Like that could have it turned into a bench game for a while, but it could have turned into like a deep bench game. Keeping in mind with both teams what they have going on, so it's kind of like thankfully some kids avoided deeper foul issues, but yeah, I think that also played into it where it didn't look crisp at times or for long stretches, frankly, because both teams were going deeper into their benches and they were playing lineups that probably haven't seen many minutes together in games or in practices for over the course of the entire season. Just and not even necessarily like yes, players that don't see big minutes, but also just groupings of kids together that you probably not used to seeing on together. So it was one of those sorts of games. Like there's a lot of different factors. Ella Tremarchi was one of them that got bit with the foul bug early. She played, I think the exact number was like 5 minutes and 7 seconds or 5 minutes and 8 seconds, something like that in the first half. 0 points, 2 fouls. And once she picked up her second with a little under 3 minutes left in the first quarter, she was done for the half. Didn't come back in until the beginning of the third quarter. And there's this says something about her. I think it says something about her maturity as a player where that can screw with a lot of kids because you maybe missed 11 minutes of game time, but Take those 11 minutes, factor in your stoppages of play with whistles, quarter break, timeouts, halftime. She probably went,
35, 40 minutes.
I was going to say, a good 35 minutes without playing. And a lot of times that game, for a lot of kids, you have that situation, that game is a wrap. They're done. They're a shell of themselves. They're out of it. Bag it. We'll see you Friday. Pretty much. Ella came in and put her stamp on the game in the third quarter and played aggressively without getting into any more foul trouble. So I felt like at halftime, where I think the halftime you brought up the sloppy aggression term, and my thought was like, this game is waiting for somebody to do something with it. It was a slog. Word to the great Tim Lindner out in Buffalo. That's his word. I'm just stealing it. But it was a slog for the first 16 minutes. It's just waiting for someone to claim it, waiting for someone to take it as theirs. And I thought Colony did that in the third, thanks to Ella Tremarchi. Ella put her stamp on it, getting to the rim, getting to the free throw line, converting. It was a first possession of the second half. She preceded it by missing a chippy around the rim, but then she ended up getting fouled and got to the free throw line. Saw her first free throw drop, and immediately she was facing me. Immediately nodded her head after she made the first one. I was in my notes like, this will be an Ella quarter. She just saw the one go in and she visibly nodded her head and like, okay, we're good now. And 16 points all in the second half, of 14 of them in the third quarter. She scored their first 14 of the second half and was on track to have all of their third quarter points until someone scored in the final seconds of the third. But yeah, it was again a slog, rock fight, whatever of a game that Colony, led by Ella, and her being able to respond from not seeing, not getting up and down the court for well over a half hour, coming in and making instant impact.
I'm going to throw a name out there as screw it. I'll call it the MVP of that game.
I know exactly who you're going to say.
Because this is a player who doesn't necessarily get a whole lot of playing time in the closer games. Because Colony is usually pretty tight in the rotation this season with Pleat off the bench and Rundell, and that's usually about it. But Madison Bauman came out and gave a ton of energy, a ton of effort, and just really helped steady the ship for Colony in that her presence didn't allow Averill Park to get too comfortable feeding into the paint to Lily Wolleber. It also didn't allow them to get comfortable to drive into the paint with an Ari Verardi or a Lizzie Hansen, and just made things more difficult for Averill Park than they might have expected when Ella did get in foul trouble. So to me, the MVP of that game, it may not show it a whole lot in the box score, but Madison Bauman, to me, came out and was a big part of why Colony came away with that victory on Friday night.
Yeah, I knew that's who you were going to say. The 2 foul auto sub doesn't work if you don't have people that can keep the ship afloat. And Friday was Maddie's time to keep the ship afloat. So, and it was she was called on. She was called on, and she responded. And that was that second quarter in particular was a strong stretch for her, and she was probably the main difference between them going into the locker room tied. Right? Were they tied? I think maybe, or no,
I think it was like a 2-point game at half. If I
something like
remember
that. Now I have to look myself. Um, but she was in impact. She was probably like a +6 for them.
21-16. It was a 5-point game. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, I don't know why I thought tied. Um, but I think I was thinking about some other game. But she was probably a +6 for them in the second quarter, just as far as what she brought to the table. And and a point to be made that I didn't mention before, um, kind of carrying forward what their defensive game plan was. AP made life difficult for Colony the way that they always make life difficult.
Mhm.
Um, through the relentless style, um, punishing physicality, uh, real like real ball pressure that marries chaos and discipline to principles. 99% of the world thinks that they put pressure on the basketball, and very few really put real pressure on the ball that you know puts puts opposing ball handlers in hell. Averill Park does that, and Colony turned it over a lot in stretches against it. Colony made life difficult for AP by, for most of the game, effectively making them a one-dimensional offense, because th- between Ari Verardi attacking, getting downhill, and Lily Wolleber with post touches and offensive rebounds and whatnot, no matter which way you slice it, with Kaylee Ahern out, they are a team that assaults the paint. They put pressure on your back line every single possession, and they're trying to get as many attempts within 5 feet as they possibly can. Colony, what they were at least able to do was take something out of it. You're not getting the ball in the post. We're going to do everything we can to keep you out of the paint off dribble penetration, which they did a pretty good job with. We're going to do everything we can to try to keep you off the offensive glass, which they did not do a pretty good job with. Averill Park got a ton of offensive rebounds, just weren't able to convert enough. Their offensive rebound percentage was through the roof, though. But what they were able to do is stay disciplined to a half-court defensive game plan of the ball doesn't touch the post. There is no such thing as a post touch. So it forced AP to be a little bit more one-dimensional in their attack for a while, and then just figuring out other ways, different sets, whether it was more off of ball screens or generating offense from defense or whatever. But Maddie came in, and as more of a front court defender, was able to keep them with that defensive game plan as well.
Yeah, I mean, all in all, despite the loss, though, I mean, you have to consider, I think, the week a win, given they got a nice win at a Chipping Nisk unit team on Tuesday, and then really, it's a case of, yeah, you lost at Colony Friday, but it's kind of like you said, the opportunities were there, and if you just get a few you get a few different bounces at the rim, maybe it's a different ball game in that regard. And we're talking about either another overtime game like they had the first time at Averill Park, or maybe you're talking about just an outright victory for Averill Park. So, all in all, if you're Sean Oregon, hoping that Kaylee Ahern can return and be, the Kaylee Ahern we all know, um, you know, you got to be feeling at least a bit good because, you know, let's put it this way: the team could have easily, filled up at certain points, but Cheyenne Law was able to come in and give good minutes.
Yeah.
Anna Cronin was productive. Addison Alvey was productive when, as Lizzie Hanson. They were all, it was like they were completely, ineffective. It was just really just a case of just bounces not going in, and that's really the long and short of it for AP there. So you gotta feel good about that.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you have another crossover. You have a crossover coming up in a non-league game tomorrow at Shen, which they might use as a way of testing Kaylee's foot to see if she's good for sectionals, or they might just say, hey, it doesn't count against our league record anyways. Just chill, go through warm-ups again as your test, and then we'll figure things out over the next week during practices.
Yeah, I mean AP's still in the fight, and I would agree with the sentiment that Coach Oregon today, this Monday, is probably feeling a little bit better about his prospects than last Monday.
Yes.
I think that was a solid week for them, and it's funny because AP, I don't know, I probably clearly a successful program, and I think that is an understatement, and it's well documented what their level of successes over the last decade and beyond. I've been, I've been doing this for 11 years. I watch Averill Park probably because they play late in the season every year. I've probably watched them about 8 times a year on the average. I've probably seen them about 6 times this year. I see all these kids during AAU, my own stuff. It's been a long time since I've had to look at a program or a roster and be like, who's this? I had to do that this year with them. Like they've had kids that have come in the game and get minutes, and this is like, I'm not saying this in a mean way or anything against them, but it's just kind of the sort of this is less of a they've had several years of hoopers, just like diehard hoopers, and this is more of an athlete group. Kaylee Ahern more of a basketball player. Lily Wallaber, multi-sport kid who's a little bit more down the basketball path. Ari Verardi, a multi-sport kid who's a little bit more down a different path, more like track and field. And you've got other kids on this team that are more like volleyball first, or more soccer first, or so on, softball, so on and so forth. They've had they retain their athletes. I think that's a key in what their success has been over this time. They've done a better job than nearly any other school in Section 2 of being able to retain their multi-sport athletes, even though to create depth for the team, to create depth for quality practices. But they've had kids that have received significant minutes at times this year that I was like, who was that? So I did that a little bit again against Colony, and it's the end of the season. So truly a next woman up for Coach Oregon's troops.
Let's finish up Triple A. I know this was a point of heated contention by you last week because you're like, why are these two games at the same time on the same night? Albany Shen was that was a finish, as I'll put it. I'm not sure if you had a chance to go back and watch the final few minutes in huddle.
I didn't.
But so Albany was able to come away with the 4-point victory despite committing a technical foul inside of 30 seconds and multiple turnovers to allow potential game-tying or game-winning shots for Shenendehowa.
So chaotic.
That would be the nice way of putting it. But regardless, Albany held on. Shen missed their shots. Albany escaped with and I mean this in the nicest way possible, but I have to label it a little bit of highway robbery in the way that in the way they were able to somehow survive that. But Albany getting the 4-point victory over Shen Tuesday night, and then they got a W Friday over Niskayuna. In the meantime, Julian also got a win over Boston Spa on Wednesday. So the things look way they look for AAA right now, since Schenectady is opting out of sectionals. Is we're gonna get a 6-team bracket for AAA. One would assume Shaker 1, Albany. I'll go out on a limb and say Albany gets the 2, and then you're probably looking at a kind of coin flipping. Not coin flipping, because I think Colony won both Shen games this year, if I remember correctly. I know they won the one at Colony. I'm just not remembering if they played a second time at Shen off the top of my head.
So
they did not. They played once at home once at home against Shen.
Yeah. Just flip Colony and all, which it's irrelevant as far as matchups. Again, it's just a matter of like who sits on your left side and who sits on your right.
Right.
At Hudson Valley. I anticipate seeing Shaker at the 1, Colony at the 2, Albany at the 3, Shen at the 4, just because Colony and Albany have the same league record and Colony won the head-to-head.
Okay.
So that Shaker was locked in at the 1. And Suburban is the only one out of all of these leagues, or out of all these classes, AAA is the only one that is very cut and dry, because every AAA school in Section 2 plays in the same league.
Right.
So when you're looking at the league standings, that'll pretty much dictate it for you, unless you've got some crazy stuff with 3-way ties. But with the standings of the league record, Shaker's only loss was to Guilderland of all teams early in the year. Colony and Albany both 10-2. Colony got the win over Albany.
Right.
And then Shen at the 4, Guilderland at the 5, Toga at the 6. Well, so
correct me if I'm wrong real quick. So Shaker and Colony somehow end up on opposite sides of the bracket again. And then it's like Albany and Shen basically said, okay, we couldn't do it last year. Tag, you're it. Because if I remember correctly, it was Shaker, Albany, and Colony Shen last year in the semis.
Yes.
So now it's just keep the North and South Colony schools where they are, just flip-flop Shen and Albany at this point.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that works out, because at least in my opinion, Albany, if you're talking about we're either playing Albany or Shen, I think the matchup I think the way that the Albany Shen game, because the Albany Shen game was for the 3 seed. The winner was going to get the 3, the loser was going to get the 4. Um, with the exception being if Shen, which I didn't really get into so much last week, but if Shen beat Albany, if the 2 results on Friday went the opposite direction, like if Shen beat Albany, and if
Well, Shen Albany was
Colony,
Tuesday.
or pardon me, yeah, you're right. But like going into last week of it, if Shen beat Albany and then Colony lost to Averill Park, it would have created a 3-way tie in the league standings, which would have been messy.
But Colony
But
is 2-0 against those teams. I think you still would have had Colony at the 2
then
because
then you still would have Colony.
so it just would have been a matter of splitting hairs with Shen and Albany and Shen winning the head-to-head. That would put Shen. So you would have basically just had Shen at 3.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because they lost to Columbia and Averill Park. Yeah, so regardless, that would have been like Albany Shen was a 3 versus 4 game. So
I'm just gonna be blunt. I'm just gonna be blunt here, real quick. I'm not rooting for a specific final, but there is a matchup I would not mind seeing at all. I would not mind seeing Malia Jackson against Nyana Austin. I would not mind that at all.
yeah, I think Albany's come around a bit. Now, from a team standpoint, and this is why I'm interested in how that went. I think the Shen matchup is more difficult for Shaker than the Albany matchup would be.
Because of the overall length of Shen, I'm assuming.
And pace and space.
Right.
Because Shaker's shown over this, the long stretch as the season has progressed, regardless of what our lineup, we're too big lineup playing against teams that like to stretch the floor or whatever, we're matching up. We're going to play man.
And let's not forget, it took a Sophia Lani block at the end as the clock ran out to get that win at Shen.
And a 17-point second half comeback.
Right. So I mean,
17 in the third quarter of that game.
Yeah. So we're not, by no means are we. I feel like that's kind of what the feel was coming into the season for some people, as they were just automatically saying, "Well, there's no way we're not going to get Shaker Colony again this year." Well, hold your horses, because Decky Lawson is still Decky Lawson, and obviously we saw a few weeks ago at Shen. Yes, it was on a very emotional night with, it being a Shaker Shen doubleheader and Herter's jersey retirement. But it still took a huge comeback and that last second block, like we both just mentioned, for Shaker to even win that game. So I mean, it's the total write off of Albany and Shen from some people back in October, November. There's no way you can sit there and still do that 3.5 months later. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if my favorite word is consistency, my favorite phrase is basketball is a game of matchups, and we got to look at the matchups involved here. That's why I'm like, that I think the Shaker versus Albany, and feel free to flame me if I'm wrong on this one. Shaker's personnel has the ability to out Albany. Or Albany wants to punish you, and Shaker's like, all right, cool. We can play that way. I'm not saying that there isn't a world in which Albany can beat Shaker, but I think that more things have to align for them.
To me, it would come down to a very key matchup. I think it comes down to who has the better point guard play that night. Does Azera pop off and go for 30, or is Jayla Jeter able to lock her down and keep things as even as possible between the two of them?
The heads of the dragon.
Yes.
The heads of the dragons.
Yeah.
But that Shen matchup is tricky for Shaker. And Shen got their experience. They got that taste in their mouth. We could say Shaker did too, right? But I think it means more for Shen that they got that experience last month, that they had their level of success. They saw what worked. I look back at that game and think a big reason why Shaker's comeback happened was they attempted to take advantage of that Malia Jackson matchup, which I get, and it worked. And Ship and the coaching staff, they were trying to tweak things, change the matchups around a little bit to put the right pieces in place to defend without having to switch out of man, because the last thing you want to do is zone Shen. The last thing ever that you want to do is zone them. And they tweaked it. They got the right pieces in the right spots. It's something that worked. And I thought Shen got a little bit too one-dimensional in trying to attack the Malia matchup. And because of that, they sacrificed the rhythm and the flow that they had to have the offensive success that they'd achieved. Okay, they got that experience, right? They felt that. They've seen both sides of it. They got it out of the way. So I'm not saying, that I'm thinking one side or the other wins that game, but it's a tricky matchup. So there's that on one semifinal, whereas Albany, I think, is a trickier matchup for Colony than they are for Shaker.
I know that. I'll throw in one more factor here. Mm-hmm. And I know that there's probably a few people who listen to or watch this show and think we bring this up too much, but it's a real thing when you're talking about high school athletes, particularly ones who maybe don't keep themselves involved in cardio-based sports during fall or spring. These matchups we're talking about between Shaker, Albany, Shen, Colony, those four schools, it's going to be on Hudson Valley's court.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be on an 84-foot court. It's going to be on a 94-foot court. Does that lean an advantage towards anyone specifically out of those four?
Well, everyone's been saying that they want Shaker on a 94-foot court because of, being able to run the forwards, but nobody's been
Alani's can run, though. Jeter can run.
Nobody's been able to have the level.
Malia may be a post player, but she can run the floor too. So, I mean, I don't know how much that really...
Right. People have had...
I feel like people are outthinking the room by saying that.
Right. People have had success with it in stretches. But
you're not going to get it for 32 minutes, though, with Sophia and...
Right. But you can only have success with it in stretches because it's not like you go into a game with no timeouts.
Right.
Right. You have your timeouts. You have your halftime breaks. You have even just, you saw it kind of very early at the very beginning of the season. And then Shaker Columbia game was another prime example where wasn't anything crazy. It wasn't anything, big statistically. It wasn't anything highlight worthy, and it wasn't even anything necessarily to fully note. But Ale Powell gave him a few pretty good minutes. Just Malia dealt with some foul trouble. She was tremendously impactful when in the game. I thought she was the top dog on the court when she was in the game. And I don't think it was all that close. But she dealt with some foul trouble. But when they're throwing the 6th and the 7th in the game for a few minutes here and there, just being able to continue the way that they want to play. And then Ale gives them when the little stretch, and I think that she's a kid that could potentially prove to be valuable when you get to the 94 feet because she can play 90. Like that's her thing. So, yeah, does it make an impact? It does to an extent. Uh, I think what makes more of an impact playing at Hudson Valley than the fact that it's a 94-foot court is the fact that is something else that we talked about a couple months ago. It's a cavernous
Sight
field.
lines. Yeah.
It's not the, it's, there are some people, it's all about your depth perception. It tests what shooters have good depth perception. Um, some people are not impacted by it. Some people forget how to shoot a basketball in that sort of environment. Um, so I think that makes more of an impact than the 94-foot court.
Fair. That's fair. Yeah.
So, there's different factors. Yes, the bigger court can hurt, but the building,
The
that
sight
the
lines
bigger
for the
court
shooters
is
is definitely,
in
yeah.
could probably make even more of an impact than what that court is.
Yeah.
But long story short, like I think Shen is a tricky matchup for Shaker, and I think Albany's a tricky matchup for Colony. Um, if especially over the last few weeks where we've determined that Nyana Austin is probably the best rim protector in Section 2. Just her emergence as that of just being able to block pretty much everything as a primary defender and as a help side defender. Um, if she's able to be that rim protecting presence against the Colony team that hasn't, at least when I've watched lately, they haven't been shooting the three particularly well. A lot of what they've been getting is going towards the rim. And it's a super fluid half court offense with ball movement, player movement, um, well timed cuts and decisive actions and extra passes and being able to get rim attempts. And if you bump into a situation where they're able to do that, and then Nyana blocks 7 shots without fouling, um, that can lead to players kind of looking over their shoulder, trying to finish, a la what I felt like Colony did against Shaker, kind of looking over her shoulder a little bit. Um, and she, kind of just that whole matching up athlete for athlete thing. So I would have been intrigued in our AAA semifinals no matter what. Take
Right.
those 4 teams, put them however you want. And this is nothing against Gilderland. I'm not trying to just crap on them by not mentioning them, but these 4 have separated themselves.
Right.
But no matter what way you put it down, you take those 4, you just pick 2 teams and have them play each other. No matter which 2 you pick, I think we get a good one. But the way that it's shaking out, I'm more interested in the semifinal matchups with them potentially being this.
Right. All right,
let's be 25-point games now that I said that.
All right, let's go to the Class A looking of things. So Class A, we had some interesting results. I'll start with a team that I don't feel like we've given a ton of love to this year. But I'll put it out there. Glens Falls, man. I mean, they got a pair of good victories. They had a very nice win over Queensbury back on last Monday, and then they come out and they hold South Glens Falls scoreless in the second quarter to get a big win over them against their crosstown rival on Wednesday. So Glens Falls, man, they closing out strong, getting those 2 wins last week, giving themselves a 12-8 record overall. They also got a win at Schuylerville the other day on Saturday morning. So I think there was a little bit to question there for a moment there when they lost at Amsterdam and then lost at home to Scotia. But getting to rattle off those 3 wins, particularly the win at home against Queensbury, that's a nice strong way to close out the year and really, in my opinion, put yourself in the discussion. No offense to you know, just we'll just go out and on a limb and say not a limb, but we'll go and say BP Academy, Holy Names. Those are your top 3. I think Glens Falls really put themselves in a very good discussion, a potentially heated discussion about whether or not they should get the home side of the potential quarterfinal against Chalmont being the 4 or the 5.
Yeah, going into last week, I thought it was a pretty clear top 5 with Chalmont being the 4 and Glens Falls being the 5. And now I don't think it's necessarily clear anymore.
And that's
And
despite Chalmont getting, the victory at Voorheesville on Friday. I feel like despite Chalmont getting that W, I think they also won their game earlier. Well, let me hold on. Let me double check. I'm trying to remember. I want to say Chalmont did play 2 games last week. I don't know why I'm forgetting this. Yeah, they beat. Oh, that's right. They won at Ichabod Crane Tuesday, and then they won at Voorheesville on Friday. I feel like despite getting those 2 wins on the road, I mean,
the win of
Voorheesville,
the
yeah,
week
that's
is
a nice
Glens
win.
Falls over Queensbury.
It's nice to get the sweep against Voorheesville, but I mean, you're comparing Voorheesville and Queensbury. It's
The
not quite
win
the same.
the win of the week is Glens Falls going to Queensbury, which is next door, but going next door and winning. Yeah,
Well, really, they went next door twice because they also played at South Glens Falls.
right.
So
Just one this way and one
yeah,
that way,
yeah,
like that kind of that way, like one's
right.
here and then South Glens Falls isn't. It's kind of like southwest almost. But I digress. Um, yeah, so Glens Falls, I feel like they've taken a little bit of a different trajectory arc from last year, which the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. Because Glens Falls is a team, to me, last year that looked the part of not a contender in Class A because Class A had Catholic High, but they looked the part of like a real competitor at the higher level of the foothills and a team that could really mix things up in the A's. But this is last year, they had a group of multi-year contributing seniors that were in primary roles. It wasn't just an entirely senior laden group, but it was known commodities that you know what you're going to get out of that were in generally your primary spots. Gianna and DeVere, CJ Lunt, so on. This year's group was a little bit more hodgepodge. You have some returners that there are returners that have been around for numerous years that were there was probably only one kid out of this group that I don't think her role necessarily was designated to change, and that's Darielle Gooden, because she's a physical, athletic, kind of like Draymond Greenish sort of forward. That like she's gonna be what she is. Outside of that, you either have returners whose roles were expected to expand considerably, or new players in the fold. And not necessarily, in my opinion, not necessarily players like it's not really a group that full out fits each other as far as skill sets are considered. It's not like all of these. It's not like all the pieces fit perfectly or naturally. So it makes sense that it took a little while. But and on top of that, there was a stretch of the year. This happens, I know, to everybody, but there was a stretch of the year they were not at full strength. I was at their game early in the year when the aforementioned Dariel Gooden went down. I forget whether it was a shoulder or an elbow, but it was a dislocated or separated or something or other. But it was at that. It was in Queensbury at the Michelle Bennett Memorial, and I think they played Boston Spa. Maybe I'm gonna fact check myself on that.
I think you're right.
It was the Boston Spa game when she got hurt. Yeah. So she was out for a few weeks and then kind of getting her back into the lineup. And, that's a kid coming off of uh, again, I forget whether it was shoulder or elbow, but that's a kid coming off of something like that is a very physical bruising style player. So it's getting back into the swing of things with that too. You've got the mix of, again, like your multi-year returners with roles that were expected to expand with like a Sarah Wolf Stitch, um, maybe a Kara Harrington, those sorts of players. Piper Eddy, who's a junior, who was a primary backcourt player for him last year. And then you're throwing in younger players. Allie Dickinson is a sophomore that they need scoring to come from somewhere, and she's somebody that can provide that floor spacing and shooting ability. They've got a nice young point guard there that they moved up to the varsity level this year, and Holly Hirsch, an 8th grader. That when I watched them play, when I went up to Hudson Falls and watched them play in summer league last year, and summer league for many schools is, I brought up the term hodgepodge before, like that's very much what summer league can be, and it really was with Glens Falls. I think they had like 5-6 kids, but Holly was my takeaway from Glens Falls from that day, where it was just it's not like, not beaming to the rafters with physical tools. She's a little smaller, probably 5'2", 5'3", something like that, but just the way she plays, solid, strong, steady, does all the point guards, especially for her age, does all the point guard stuff that you want in your, in the leader of your offense. Like, plays smart, gets ball where it needs to be, can take advantage of advantageous matchups and score, can shoot the ball a bit, not afraid to get to the, not afraid to try and turn the corner, get to the rim and play amongst the trees. So they've got pieces. It's just a matter of getting the younger kids acclimated to the varsity level, building confidence, and getting the younger group that you're getting used to this mixed in with the older group that is used to this, but they're probably also not used to what their expectations or what they're being asked to do this year. So it's everybody says basketball is a long season, and thankfully it is for Glens Falls, because it gives them, or it has given them, the sort of time that they need to really kind of mesh.
Big question regarding that though. There is one more game tomorrow in the Colonial Council. Chalmont plays LaSalle. Could that potentially have bigger impact on one over the other, or is there a potential for equal impact on both for sectional seeding?
Do you mean Chalmont versus LaSalle as far as who it matters more for, comparing A to B?
Yes. or do you think it's equal footing?
So I would have to ask Gigs on about this probably, because I know that the Colonial has multiple divisions. I don't specifically know how they've broken down what they consider. I know what it says on High School Sports Act. I don't know if that's 100% accurate, as far maybe it is, maybe it isn't, as far as what they considered to be league scheduling, for what they go into the meeting with. If what is shown on the High School Sports Stats website, if that is accurate as far as what the numbers that they are using for Colonial Council league records, it 100% matters more in the B's, because what I'm seeing right now is LaSalle is 7-6 in the league. Voorheesville is 7-7 in the league. Although Voorheesville beat LaSalle when they played each other at the beginning of the season, that would mean if LaSalle beats Chalmont, they would be above Voorheesville in Class B seeding, because they're 8-6, Voorheesville 7-7. If what's showing on High School Sports Stats is correct, like if that's the numbers that they're using for leagues, and they're not talking about like just within your division, because the Colonial has, so those that are fully aware that are listening, Colonial has numerous divisions, and within your division you play each other twice. Beyond that, I believe it's once, and so on. I think that's what it is, right? Probably you play maybe everybody else within the league one time,
I believe that's how it is. Yeah.
but you played within your division twice. Like the private schools all have their own division.
Right.
Catholic High, Academy, Holy Names, LaSalle.
Yeah.
And then play everybody else once. So if LaSalle wins, that would put LaSalle, my understanding of how all this works, that would put LaSalle above Voorheesville in Class B seeding, because LaSalle would have the better league record, even though Voorheesville won the head-to-head. If LaSalle loses to Chalmont, that puts them both at 7-7, with Voorheesville winning the head-to-head, which
Can I,
puts them above LaSalle.
can I throw a little wrench in everything right now?
Mm-hmm.
Because allow me to be blunt for a second. Speaking of gigs, Holy Names just got the crap end of the stick last week. I mean, you want some more bad luck. First, you have Kate Galuli go off and drop a career high against you early in the week. And then a Catholic High team that didn't have Dior Dobert for their game early in the week against Academy when they lost gets Dior back, and they beat you at home on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So you suffer, in the end, you suffer a good loss that you probably thought wouldn't have been the way it did go, because you weren't sure about the Dior situation. And then you have the loss to LaSalle. So the reason I bring that up, if Chalmont wins, if as long as everything is equal with the numbers that we're seeing, because I'm looking at the same site as you, Chalmont would be 2 games higher, or better, I should say, in conference standings than Holy Names, and their loss to Holy Names was only by 9, and that was like game 3 of the season. Is there any feasible way we could see, with a win over LaSalle, Chalmont leapfrogging Holy Names into the 3? Or do you think it's lock, stock, and barrel, Holy Names is there as a 2 or 3?
I would need clarification on this, because it's showing that Holy Names' league record is 10-5, and my understanding is they've. Do we all have? Yeah, that's what I guess this is what I would need some clarification on, because it would then show that some of these teams have 14 league games and some of them have 15, and because Chalmont shows is 11-3, and they still have the LaSalle game, and I don't know. Throw that crap out the window. I'm confused now.
Well, I'm sorry for confusing you. You can put
I
that on me.
no, no. It's some of I would need to actually sit here and do some real digging and um, I guess a little bit of research in the sense of does everybody have 14 league games, but they picked up a non-league game against another colonial opponent, or what exactly is the deal here? Um, but yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point because it hadn't hit me that Chalmont's and yeah, and here's the other thing of it. If that's the case, right? If we're just using these league records, and I was just thinking about this talking about LaSalle. Um, if we use just the overall who you play against everybody in the colonial for what your league record is, um, list the start listing who you think the best colonial council teams are in order. Right? Catholic Central, Albany Academy, Holy Names, Chalmont, right?
Right.
LaSalle, Troy, Voorheesville. The out of the first five that I mentioned, four of them are the private schools. They're all in the same division.
Right. Yeah.
So, for as much as I know that the other side of this is, they're private school, they can recruit, and here, but here, all the lovely stuff we get to hear about this, um, but if those are the numbers that they're using, it actually kind of hurts the private schools because you got to play each other, like you get 6 games against each other in what's clearly the most difficult division.
And LaSalle's
Compared to,
program is only what, 3 years old?
yeah.
Like, I'll start and end the argument right there. Their program's 3 years old. Just stop, please. Um,
Yeah, I mean that would put it puts a private if they use that, it put the private schools at a disadvantage compared to the public schools as far as what the seating is for within in order and in the order of what you're where you stand within your league.
mhm.
Uh, I would have to ask for clarification on whether they use this full out against all colonial record or if they just use divisional records and then kind of figure it out amongst there because Holy Names has a head to head over Chalmont, and it would just watching team for team, player for player, it would make sense if Holy Names was the higher seed. But you know, yeah, that's a really long, drawn out way of saying, yeah, like if that's how it works out, then yeah, that could happen, right?
Because technically that would make Shelmont the winner of that division, right?
Well, it would give. I imagine so. Yeah, it would give them a better league record than a Colonial Council record than Holy Names, and I to me the biggest thing out of all of this, I guess, before thinking about it from this lens, but going into it, the biggest thought of last week was, okay, Holy Names just dropped that to LaSalle. I think that kind of cements Broad Albin as a 2.
Mm.
Uh, but Jesus, if that now means that Holy Names has to play against Academy in a semifinal, yeah,
Yeah, that'd be intriguing. Um, Two other things quick about one I'm just gonna do in passing. Scotia, mixed bag for them. They get a nice comeback win at Amsterdam Monday, but then end up getting dominated at BP later in the week on BP senior night. In which, by the way, congrats to Molly Russum. She eclipsed 1,000 career points on senior night. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Albany Academy, we mentioned the big win over Catholic Central at home. Dior was did not play in that game. I don't know why, but she eventually, like I mentioned, came back and played in the Holy Names game at the end of the week. And then Academy went and just took care of business against LaSalle on Saturday morning, originally Friday night, but there was a ref shortage, so they had to reschedule for the next morning. In which Eva Gito got her 1,000th career point at LaSalle. And by the way, they beat LaSalle handily without Alex Leonard in the lineup.
And without Emily Thornton.
Right. So they had Maggie Zayak starting and they had Maddie Leonard starting. So that puts even more credence to your conversation about how those two wins pretty much lock in Academy at the one at this point. And now we're looking at a Class A, by the way. I'm expecting another withdrawal, I would assume, by the end of the week. I could be wrong. But right now we have 3 Class A's not playing in sectionals. Gloversville, Hudson Falls, and Hudson. So that brings us down to 11 schools for Class A. The other school I'm potentially expecting to not play in sectionals is Lansingburg, but I could be wrong. I don't know. But for now, we're sitting at 11, which means, let me see here. You'd still have, let me think. 10, yeah, you'd still have, let me think here. Hold on. 11, so you'd have what? Three first round games?
6, 11, 7, 10, and 8, 9. Yep.
Okay, yeah, 6, 11, 7, 10, 8. Right, okay. And then your quarterfinals. See, big math I had to do there.
So with all of this, and this was more specifically towards the B's and the C's. I didn't really bring it up then, but how the scheduling works, where we have our seating meeting on Friday, and then if there's like prelims
the next day,
we're not going to have any prelims because there's no bracket that'll have more than 16 teams. Because the prelims are for
right. The B's were down to 15
when the 14 plays the 19, 12
right.
plays the 21 and stuff like that. And yeah, now that there's been
14 in B.
And
how many did we say in C?
16 in C as of now.
4. Wait, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh yeah. We're at 16. Yeah. Well, there you go. You won't even need Saturday. There you go. Everybody gets an extra day of rest. Congratulations. Didn't even think of that right there. Okay. Let's see here. What else? Okay. Double A's quick. We mentioned the Catholic Central stuff, but in the end, I mean, I guess the only question comes, did Columbia's loss to Shaker basically cost them the one at that point?
I don't know. I thought if Columbia lost to Shaker and Catholic High beat Academy, that was going to be the fuel to have Catholic High be the one. But and I get extenuating circumstances. Dior didn't play, right? But when it comes to the meeting, I don't think they're asking why. I think they're asking what. Like, what did you win or did you lose? Was it because Dior didn't play? I don't care. Did you win or did you lose? That. So that's the only one to me out of all 6 classes, even including the B's, which we've discussed for over 2 months that the bees are just
A mess.
uh, you know,
Politely speaking, they're a mess.
bees are messier than the the slushy parking lots that we got to see in yes.
Oh, don't get me started. Oh,
Um, but I think Double A brings up maybe the best discussion as far as who is the one.
I would
B
agree.
B's way more about like who's the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, the 12. Um, but as far as like who is the one, I think Columbia versus Catholic High is the best discussion of the bunch. And it's one that actually probably matters. It's because it's not like a because it's not a foregone conclusion that well, these two are just way better than everybody else, and they're going to see each other in the championship anyways. It's not quite that. Like it's not that. Because I don't care. You can't, especially if Kaylee Ahern's back, you can't look past Averill Park. The way Bethlehem has been playing, you can't look past them either. And I think similar to AAA, I think it turns into matchups with them. Like I could see Bethlehem having problems with Catholic High, but the way they're playing, they can have a chance, like a legitimate chance against Columbia.
Could I
Averill
throw
Park,
could
I
I
think,
throw in
has
another wild card that I don't think is going to have enough respect because of the way the numbers look for them? And again, I only saw them play in person once, but I watched a couple of their games as well. Um, gotta love Huddle, love it. Um, for my own sake, I'll throw in Niskiuna.
yeah,
If you catch if they catch Niskiuna on the wrong day, where their athlete's athlete, and Natalie Birmingham can pirouette her way into the paint whenever she wants, you're asking for trouble.
yeah, they're a dark horse. They're definitely it's a matchup based group.
Yeah,
Um, there are matchups in this double A field they're gonna have clear issues with, but there are also teams that with their personnel will have clear issues with Niski with their dynamic athleticism. Uh, they're coming in on a bit of a slide. Now, granted, their last 3 games of the year were Shaker, AP, Albany, so the
you're
schedule
allowed. It's
didn't do
allowed.
yeah, the schedule didn't necessarily do them big time favors in that sense. If you really want to go back a little bit, they're 1-5. They've lost 5 of their last 6. Those 5 losses were to the 3 that I just mentioned, Columbia and Bethlehem, who's playing much better right now.
To the point where they held Gilliland to 13 points in the second half on senior night Friday night.
Yeah, so they're that's a very difficult last 3 weeks of the season for Niski. So not coming in on a high note. Hopefully they can, kind of hit the reset button and turn that around. But it wasn't like it was any sort of perplexing, stunning, shouldn't have happened losses. Like that's a brutal finish to the season from a scheduling perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean they can they can ruin somebody's season on any given night. So I don't mean to just count them out of the fold because they certainly can. Just have to be able to put something steady and strong together for 32 minutes
Right.
and not, the ebbs and flows, the top of the wave and then crashing back into earth sort of thing. It's got
Yeah.
to be.
And we kind of got to put Troy in that conversation too, just because if they go against a team that likes to have it slowed down at a half court, if Troy can get out and run, I mean, they got a lot of young legs out there that could cause trouble as well. So um, that would be interesting as well to see how matchups play out for Troy. Uh,
And
you
they
know,
they believe too. I think they're confident in themselves.
it's a big bounce from last year to this year. Well, I'll definitely say that they have definitely there's definitely been a lot of growth from last year when they're going through a lot of growing pains. Year one with Coach Harris to just this year. I mean the improvement is certainly noticeable from year one to year two under Coach Harris.
And they should go into this double it wherever they're seated at. Um, they should go into this feeling like they're playing with house money,
Oh, absolutely.
right? Like they're young, they've good record, but in the Colonial and the we talk about the Colonial Council schedule being a strength for Class B teams, uh, and then being fine for A's, and then for double A's, not so much compared to the Suburban. So you've got these sorts of factors where you kind of get counted out. Uh, so you get that matchup here playing. You're playing with house money.
Yeah.
Go play free.
Yeah. As far as the uh games of note for these final 4 days of regular season, there's only like I think two games going on tonight. Well, actually, I don't even know if they're both happening, just based on the wind advisories and the lake effect that's ravaging the Mohawk Valley right now, to the point where all of my boys' whack crossover games for tonight at FM have been canceled. So I don't even know if Schoharie versus Gibbons is happening on the girls' side. The other game being Whitehall at Ticonderoga. But as far as the rest of the week is concerned, we mentioned the AP Shen game tomorrow. The girls' WAC Cup is Northville against BKW. That'll be played at FMCC. We mentioned LaSalle at Shalmont. Guilderland at Queensbury, also a crossover matchup tomorrow night. That's one of those where, be nice to see Queensbury get off the mat and, regroup themselves going into sectionals. We also have Broad Alban Perth at CVA Wednesday. And then we mentioned Cooksaki happens at Stillwater earlier. And then Shaker at Pine Bush in a non-league matchup Thursday.
Yeah, this is an interesting. Like the last week of the regular season going into seeding is usually bland. This is the week that I tend to leave on Monday and you don't see me again until the middle of the next week. And I'm still going to be hitting the road a lot this week, but this is the most interesting last week of the regular season that I can remember as far as matchups. AP Shen always happens right before sectionals, and that's great. But you got some really interesting and the Waction, that's always great. But you got some really interesting stuff here beyond that. Another like the Chalmont LaSalle one could really mean something for seeding.
Mm-hmm.
BPCVA is interesting. I might go out on Wednesday to watch that. Tuesday, you brought up Coxsackie Stillwater. I'm going to bring up Coxsackie again. They have an interesting. So that's on Thursday. Before that, I'm mad that I'm missing this. On Tuesday, they have Malone coming to town from Section 10.
Oh, right, yeah.
They both needed a game, and they ended up being able to make that work. Where Malone's going to make the trip. Malone's good. This is a tough game for even at home, even with a 3+ hour, probably 4-hour bus ride for Malone. Like this is a tough game for Coxsackie. So with Olivia Simser, who was maybe the top player in Section 10, if not one of the top 2 or 3, And they've got three upperclassmen on that team that are solid D3 level players. And Malone probably more than likely we're looking at as the sub-regional opponent for Utica Notre Dame in Class A once we get to that point in early mid-March. So
yeah, top 10 ranked in the state in Class A.
So this is an interesting week. Unfortunately, I'm planning on missing that as long as the weather holds off and there's no issues with the WAC games tomorrow. But should be fun.
Yeah, that Shaker Pine Bush game. I mean, you're talking about two top 15 teams in the AAA rankings as well. As Pine Bush is only surpassed by Our Lady of Lourdes in Section 9 in the state rankings right now. So
Mm-hmm.
that'll
And
be
Pine Bush holds a win over Lords. I was at that game. At the end of the day, I think, unfortunately, I hate to put it this way, but I think that the Lords sustained an injury late in the third quarter. Their top big kid, Bianca Vilovich. And I think if Bianca doesn't get hurt, Lords ends up winning that game. Pine Bush was able to send it to overtime and win an absolute rock fight. I think they went, it was a shot right before the buzzer from a Pine Bush player that sent it to overtime at like 32. It was super, super low scoring. But we talk about this with Shaker, that Pine Bush is a big, tough, athletic team that just grinds everybody to the bone.
all right. I mean, that's all I've got. Yeah, I know you're going to be running around. You mentioned AP Shen. You're going to probably go to BPCV at CVA. You're going to be.
I got the WAC
at the end of the week.
I got the WAC tomorrow. I probably have BPCVA on Wednesday, and then a lot of Section 4 stuff.
Yeah.
League, because they have all their league playoffs and league championship games Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So
yeah. So in the meantime, don't forget, you can catch all Jeff's stuff on the X Twitter thing at NYS Takeover. He's on Instagram at Empire State Takeover. The website EmpireStateTakeover.com. Real quick on the plugs. Upstate 20. What are we thinking for this week?
I'm not going to do it until the weekend, just because kind of two semi-fragmented weeks.
Okay.
So the way I'll go with the Upstate 20 is so I posted last week's around the middle, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm letting this week run. I'm going to do another update around weekend time as we hit sectionals. So going into playoffs, there's an updated Upstate 20.
Okay.
And then I'll do one more after sectionals. So Upstate 20 kind of takes a little bit of a back seat, although it'll still be updated with like the all Upstate teams. And probably the big thing to hit in the next few days, I am doing playoff previews for my entire coverage region, every section, every class.
Okay.
So they should all be out. Generally speaking, they're going to be out within 24 hours of when the seedings get released.
Okay.
Well, that'll be, and we've got a series of them. Like Section 3 seeding is maybe, I think Section 3 seeding is Wednesday, maybe, or Wednesday or Thursday. Section 4 seeding is Wednesday, Thursday. We are Friday. Section 5 is Saturday and 6 is Sunday. So the weather over the weekend, what it did, and the lack of a schedule allowed me to kind of lay the framework down for all of those articles, so I can at least kind of quickly crank it out as information comes in.
Very good.
I can just kind of process my thoughts and boom, get it out. So that's going to be the back end of this week. If you're looking for playoff previews, my picks for each class in each section, contenders, notes, as far as matchups and seeding and whatnot. I'm going to have all that the back end of this week, section 2 and beyond, from out to Western New York, down to Westchester, up to
Canada,
up to where they have French on the highway signs.
Yep.
So
All right, very good. So next week, obviously, we'll go through the section 2 brackets, and also because going through brackets will be, because the fact that there's so little actual games going on this week, and we'll just be going through brackets. Jeff and I are going to also present our regular season all class teams. Every single class, 6 classes. We're naming an MVP for each class, a coach of the year, as well as 5 all class players. So 5 plus an MVP makes 6, and then a coach of the year for each classification. Looking forward to that. Mr. Jeff, enjoy your week, safe travels, and let's try to get the wind to stop, please. I'm begging you.
yeah, please. My branches in the backyard are just one by one dropping into the earth.
All right, man. Well, safe travels, and we'll talk again next week. All right.
All right, sounds good.